Hey everybody, it's Aidan here, and welcome to the first episode of something called Hot Laps and Chat, where I have some hot laps going on in the background, and I try to start a conversation as opposed to telling a story or doing a race. Now, in this first episode of probably the only episode I do, and at the risk of sounding like Donald Trump, how do we make F1 great again? Now, in the background here, you'll see some hot laps from each era of F1 from the 60s all the way through to today, sort of looking at the glory years and so on. Now, the answers to this question, depending on where you go on the internet, range from the smart, to the surreal and entertaining, to the downright stupid. And I want to add my own thoughts on the matter. I'm trying to be realistic here, and I'd like to get some fan feedback on the matter, as the first cars are being released and testing starts in a few weeks. I've also attempted to make the footage look like it's evolving through the years in terms of the film quality, but Formula 1 seems to have hit a brick wall in terms of evolution. The powers that be seem to know something is not right, and Liberty's Chase Carey, the man with the tash, appointing Ross Brawn as technical advisor proved very popular with fans, even if most of them got a little bit too excited straight away thinking old RB was going to bring back everybody's beloved V10s. And if you come across anyone that begs for Liberty to ditch the Halo and bring back the V10s, punch them. Punch them till your hand breaks. Is that too aggressive? I think that might actually be too aggressive. We've also seen Liberty Media get a little more social media savvy in recent months. We've seen the beginnings of Girl the Grid, access to the driver's briefing for the first time since the late 80s, and yes, that driver introduction at the US Grand Prix in 2017. Good God, what were they thinking? Oh, and all the other YouTube stuff. In addition, thanks to the FIA, we've seen the cars look a little more aggressive thanks to their rules. The downforce is back, the lap times have dropped, but there's something still not quite right. So what I've done here is I've looked into the 5 things that I think are most broken and aimed to put them right. Starting with number 1, the lack of wheel-to-wheel racing and one-team dominance. Face it, F1 is a sport. Sports have dominant teams, they always have, they always will, and it will always go around in cycles. Liverpool in the 1980s, Manchester United in the 90s and early 2000s, Real Madrid and Barcelona absolutely obliterating Spain every year. Okay, let's put this back into motorsport terms and forget the football analogies. In the 90s, Williams was the team to beat. Then Ferrari came along and won 5 drivers' titles in a row with Michael Schumacher before Vettel dominated for 4 in a row, and now we have Mercedes. In Australia, Jamie Whincup and Triple Eight atop of the pile. We saw Valentino Rossi on the bikes, the Ford GT making Enzo Ferrari rage quit at Le Mans, and so on. It happens. Look at how the Jamaicans ripped apart the Olympics for the last 12 years, and Bolt was unbeatable for so long. Someone else will fill that gap, and it's a phrase that Jackie Stewart uses all the time. There is always someone else. You're never going to get rid of one-team dominance, even in sports with loads of parity and homologation like V8 supercars, LMP1s and the like. So we'll move on to the lack of wheel-to-wheel racing. People always jump to the early 2000s as being the glory years of the sport, when I distinctly remember one-team dominance, one-driver dominance, with overtaking not really being anything to write home about. Fact of the matter is, overtaking has gone up since the ban on refueling in 2009. Okay, before you start commenting, most of that is due to DRS, and people complain about it being it's fake overtaking. But if you strip that away, then people will complain there's no overtaking at all. When the FIA made the front wings higher in a bid to reduce front-end grip, cars were able to follow closer as a result, even in 2014 to 2016 when it was low, but narrow. I refer you to Lewis and Nico's duel in the desert, and Schumacher and Alonso at Imola in 2005. So what should we do? I reckon go back to that 2005 to 2008 style higher wing, simplify the front and rear wings to allow cars to follow closer, as well as change some of the floor rules. Not full-on Lotus style ground effect, but allow the rear diffuser to produce a little more downforce. Maybe even go back to the double diffuser or blown diffuser that we used to see. I don't know if that would actually make things any better, but then again, I'm not an aerodynamicist. In addition, corners like Eau Rouge should be challenges taken on the absolute limit of balls and grip. It's now too easy, and as a result, I think Eau Rouge has lost a little bit of its magic. Also, if you're going flat out through Pouhon, you've got too much grip. Racing doesn't need 7 million overtakes to be good. Look at how Vettel tried to get past Bottas at Sochi, but he couldn't. Alright, most of that, or part of that, would have been down to dirty air, but I was glued to my television screen watching it. It was exciting, even if Vettel didn't get past. Rose-tinted goggles are a common thing amongst F1 fans. It was always better in the past. It's like people saw 2 highlight reels from the 80s and assumed that every race in the 80s and 90s was a classic. They weren't. There was, more often than not, a processional race with very little overtaking, and it only really got interesting if one of the top name drivers' engines exploded. Reliability doesn't help these days. In the old days, even if it was a little bit boring, there was always the tension of whether or not someone's car would last the whole distance. Remember how shocked everyone was when Lewis's engine blew up in Malaysia? If that had been 1995, it was just another race. When people suggest ways to improve the show, most comments always translate to make it like the 80s, which isn't progress. It's a massive step backwards. If you were to compare Formula 1 with Formula 1 20 years ago, the gap between first and last place in qualifying has got much smaller. In the 1997 Australian Grand Prix, the gap between Jacques Villeneuve on pole and Jos Verstappen in last place was 5.5 seconds, with 3 cars failing to make the cut in 107%. In the 2017 Australian Grand Prix, the gap between Hamilton and Palmer was 3.1 seconds, with all 19 cars behind Hamilton well within the 107% rule. But we still see the same 3 or 4 teams running away with it. And that neatly leads me into point number 2. Point number 2. Budgets. This is a biggie, so please bear with me. What I would like to see Ross Brawn and his mates create is an environment where another Eddie Jordan, Lord Hesketh, although it would probably have to be someone like Roman Abramovich or Mark Zuckerberg, can buy the modern equivalent of the Cosworth DFV, build his own car, and have a chance of competing. Gene Haas has sort of done it, even if his car is a 99 Pistol Ferrari, but then even he admits that the gap that Red Bull, Mercedes and Ferrari have is way too big. It also does not help that the more successful teams, Williams, McLaren, Mercedes, Red Bull and especially Ferrari, get way more money than everybody else, even more so when Williams and McLaren haven't won a race in over 5 years, let alone a title. Ferrari gets a whopping amount of cash for being a long-standing team before the season has even begun. This is money that Liberty is threatening to take away, as teams like Manor, Caterham, Sauber and others could benefit or could have benefited in that money being more equally attributed. Even though Mercedes won the championship in 2017, they will actually receive less money than Ferrari, who came in second. On your screen is a graphic. Column 1 payments are calculated based on a team's classification over 2 of the past 3 years, while Column 2 payments are based solely on a team's 2016 classification with only the top 10 qualifying. The Column 1 pot is divided equally amongst all qualifying teams, with each estimated to earn $36 million. Had Manor survived, that figure would have been $32.5 million, $1 million down on the previous season, but following the outfit's closure, that payment was shared equally with the other 9 qualifying teams. As Haas had only completed 1 season, it does not qualify for Column 1 payments. Column 2 is calculated on a sliding scale from 1st down to 10th place, with the 1st receiving 19% of the fund, 6th 9% and 10th 4%. Ferrari, Mercedes, Red Bull and McLaren have all agreed separate deals for Constructors' Championship bonus payments. Ferrari also receives a long-standing team payment, while Williams collects a heritage payment. Red Bull receives an extra payment for being the first team to sign up to the current bilateral agreement, which runs until 2020, and this totals $35 million. After meeting its agreed target of 2 World Championships, Mercedes earns a special annual payment that matches Red Bull's. Ferrari will receive $180 million, representing almost 1/5 of this total pot, but $12 million less than in 2016. That's $108 million more than what Force India receives, despite the latter finishing just 1 place adrift in the Constructors' Championship in 2016. Mercedes won both the Drivers' and Constructors' Championships for the 3rd successive year in 2016, but still received $9 million less than Ferrari. Force India and Williams both finished ahead of McLaren in the standings, but will receive less courtesy of McLaren's CCB payment. So what's the point in fighting for a championship to get the prize money if the guys that finish below you are going to get more anyway? The system's broken and has been for a very long time. If the pot was shared out equally, each team would get $94 million. That would leave Ferrari's payment down by $86 million, while Sauber, the final team to qualify for both Column 1 and 2 payments, would receive an extra $45 million. Imagine how much development they would get done with that money. They'd certainly close the gap and be more competitive, allowing for closer racing instead of being in a predictable spot every year, and, if you're one of those believers, resorting to pay drivers to pay the bills. The National Hockey League and the National Football League have equal distribution of money as well as salary caps, and it's worked. Competition is much better. Rugby League has been way more competitive since they introduced rules to stop Wigan winning every year, but the problem is, with politics playing a massive part in F1, some teams will be reluctant to let the smaller teams get a bigger slice of the pie. If F1 is to be competitive, allowing teams to compete is a must instead of it just being survival of the fittest and screw everybody else. Number 3. Engines. Get rid of the hybrids. And before you all start cheering and going, yes, this guy knows what he's talking about, bring back the V12s. I don't mean V12s. Alright, yeah, no, V10s will do. No, not even V10s. I'll settle for a V8. It's not even going to be a V8. I reckon 1.6 litre turbo V6s with a Kurz system much like those found on F1 cars in the 80s, which can rev higher and produce a better sound. The thing with the hybrid is because of the internal combustion engine not working so hard, it is inherently quieter. Bolting a turbo to the engine does the same, albeit not as much, but if you don't get a little excited every time you hear a turbo wastegate blowing off and going do you even like engines? Engines will then be cheaper, lighter, and with modern engineering being the way it is, you should be able to blow enough turbo pressure through to generate the 1000-ish horses we see today. You'd have to make the fuel tanks bigger though, and maybe allow the cars to run on that biopetrol stuff made from rapeseed or whatever the fuck it is, to encourage the development of such fuels as an alternative to oil-based petroleum. But no refueling. Give the cars, I don't know, 160 litres to play with. That should add the hybrid power weight back in, and then as that burns away, cars will go a lot quicker and be able to push harder. Number 4. The tracks. Most FIA-sanctioned tracks have millions of miles of runoff area these days with tarmac in place of gravel. Now I'm a little undecided on this. Would Fernando Alonso's collision with Esteban Gutierrez have been as huge if the exit of Melbourne's Turn 3 had been concrete? Sure, motor racing is dangerous. I get that. The drivers get that. But I bet any money there would have been a "how is this allowed to happen" witch hunt had Nando been seriously injured. This is only my opinion, of course, as with everything else I've said, but the older tracks like our beloved Monza, Spa, Silverstone and so on have evolved in line with the latest safety improvements, meaning elements of the old historical tracks are still there. Tracks like Abu Dhabi and Sochi, for instance, have been built with those safety features built in. And with a lot of tracks also hosting motorbike races as well as car races, it's probably safer for a biker to slide across tarmac into a big cushiony tyre wall than it is for his head to dig into a gravel trap and potentially have his head pulled off. But I don't know, I'm not a biker, I'm a human. Don't change the tracks. I'll rephrase. Don't change the tracks unnecessarily. The FIA has guidelines on the first corners having to be a certain radius for safety, but I think moving the pits at Monza to the straight after the Ascari chicane would be better, because there's always a turn 1 clusterfuck at the first chicane on the first lap. And make the timing line and the finish line the same place, just in front of pole position. It creates a final dash to the line, especially at places like Suzuka and Bahrain. I mean, we all saw the great drag race between Lance Stroll and Valtteri Bottas at Azerbaijan last year. And speaking of Lance Stroll, number 5. New talent. Because of Max Verstappen, a new rule was brought in regarding the handing out of super licenses. Drivers must now be 18 years old and accumulate 40 points over 3 years to qualify, and the criteria is on your screen now. What it would change is F3 to have the same amount of points as GP3 or the Formula Renault 3.5 series to make drivers win 2 consecutive F3 titles to qualify, or make GP2 or F2 compulsory. While this wouldn't have bothered Verstappen, Button or Raikkonen, it probably would have helped Lance Stroll. In fact, revisions have now been made for 2018 that means that drivers will now more than likely have to head through GP2 to get into Formula 1. If F2 is to be made a compulsory step on the journey to Formula 1, the winner should be guaranteed an F1 seat. In 2017, there were 38 eligible drivers to earn a super license, young and old, including Lance Stroll, Stoffel Vandoorne, Will Power, Lucas Di Grassi, Sebastian Buemi, Sergei Sorokin, who now has one as of 2018, Scott Dixon, Helio Castroneves, Brendan Hartley, who has also got one, Juan Pablo Montoya, Anthony Davidson, Mark Webber, Nelson Piquet Jr. and Simon Pagenaud. Robert Kubica, before it is brought up, was not on the list of 38. He could still get one, but it would need a unanimous vote of a panel at the FIA as he is a former licence holder before the system was implemented. As of 2018, Lando Norris is over the 40-point mark, Shane Van Gisbergen is closing in on 40 points, he has 30, and if he wins the Supercars title this year, he could actually enter Formula 1. Nicolas Prost is also eligible. But how would you enforce a rule to ensure that the GP2 champion gets into F1? If you're in the situation Williams were in until they signed Sorokin with only having one driver locked down, they would have to put provisions in place to accept the F2 winner if there were no other seats available. The FIA would then sponsor that driver into that seat for 1 year. If that rule is too complicated, then the FIA would sponsor the driver to be an official reserve driver that must compete in every FP1 session for the year and get rookie testing time like we see currently happening in Australia. Another 2 or 3 days of separate testing under the watchful eye of the FIA to stop teams using it as a data exercise. Simona Di Silvestro, for instance, was allowed 3 days testing for her main game debut at the start of 2017, along with Alex Rouleau. This rule also applies to any driver that has been out for 3 seasons or more, which could be referred to as the Marcus Ambrose rule. This rule may have helped Paul di Resta in time for Hungary. Guaranteeing a GP2 Championship winner a spot in an F1 team in some capacity would mean that some drivers won't have to give up on the dream. As an example, in 2012, neither the driver that finished first or second in the GP2 series that year made it to Formula 1, and in the following year, none of the top 3 did. None of the top 5 did. Marcus Ericsson, who finished 6th, was the first to secure an F1 drive, with money probably being the reason, and Felipe Nasr tested for Williams, and he finished 5th. At the same time, in 2012, Bottas jumped straight to F1 skipping GP2, and in 2013, Danica Kvyat jumped straight to F1 from GP3. Carlos Sainz Jr., Paul di Resta and Pascal Wehrlein would also skip GP2. Out of the 25 or so drivers to participate in the entire season in 2013, Ericsson was the only driver to progress straight from a GP2 car into a full-time F1 drive in 2014, with Felipe Nasr, who, like I said, finished 5th, tested for Williams before getting a Sauber drive in 2015. As of the end of 2017, Fabio Lima, Sam Bird and James Collado, the top 3 of GP2 in 2012, have yet to sit in a Formula 1 car in a competitive capacity. Sam Bird is currently in Formula E, Collado is in the WEC, Lima is currently racing in VLN according to Autosport, and recently said that GP2 makes no sense and is a waste of time and money. Jolyon Palmer, Stoffel Vandoorne and Pierre Gasly made belated graduations after winning. Yes, Palmer won GP2. While Palmer and Vandoorne took an extra year off before going into Formula 1, they did serve as test and reserve drivers for Formula 1 teams. As of the end of the 2016 season, 30 of 174 drivers to participate in GP2 have gone into full-time F1 seats, which is a 17.2% graduation rate. Of all those 30 drivers, only Lewis Hamilton and Nico Rosberg have become world champion. Another shocking statistic, out of those 30 drivers, only 3, Hamilton, Rosberg and Pastor Maldonado, who won the 2010 season, have won a Formula 1 Grand Prix. Compare that to the following drivers since 2005, Valtteri Bottas, Sebastian Vettel, Robert Kubica, Daniel Ricciardo and Max Verstappen have all won races in Formula 1, all of them without ever going through GP2. Which makes you wonder why they bother having that series if lower series are producing more drivers. Of course, you have the right to agree or disagree with all this, but this is just a way of generating discussion as the cars are being launched around now and testing's not far away. If you have any ideas beyond bring back the V12s and ditch the Halo, let me know. So, these have been my 5 ideas on how to fix Formula 1. If you have any ideas, please leave them below and let's get a conversation going. It would be nice to know what you think. Thanks for watching, remember to like and subscribe, and I'll be back very soon with another video on Monday that will actually have some racing in rather than just me babbling. Until next time, I've been Aidan Millward and I hope you have yourselves a cracking weekend. Goodbye.